Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the chairs of the sessions, Professors Thomas Levy and Mauricio Forte, for giving us the opportunity to present our work once again at ASOR. Today I will be speaking in behalf of Pedro Azara, Joan Borrell, Eric Rusin and myself, Marc Marin, about a team of architects and students based in the School of Architecture of Barcelona in Spain, about the work that our team has been developing on the subject of archaeological reconstructions. Our collaboration as architects in the discipline of archaeology started almost a decade ago with the invitation to participate in the archaeological missions of Terca and Tel Masaic under the direction of Professors Olivier Rouault and Maria Gracia Massetti from Paris Sorbonne. The last 3 years we were also able to collaborate in their new mission in the Iraqi Kurdistan in the Neo-Syrian Tell of Qasr Shemamok near Irbil. Today we will structure this presentation around the subject of new technologies applied to archaeological reconstructions, although we will not focus exclusively on those documents generated for the missions. Instead, we will also include our experience working in exhibitions of archaeological material, in particular with 2 exhibitions that took place in Barcelona and in Madrid, and for which we were asked to generate graphic documents that would address a broader audience. We thought it would be interesting to compare both experiences working within the discipline and for the non-specialized viewer through the perspective of the different techniques used, addressing today's subject from a broader context. Throughout the presentation, we will consider whether, when using these different techniques, we are dealing with analytical, virtual, or cyber archaeology, and to what extent these different methods can be complementary, both in the interpretation of the evidence as well as in its dissemination. What we call new technologies has changed year by year since our first collaboration in the missions of Tel Masaic and Terca in 2007 in Syria, already 7 years ago. Today we tend to understand the term new technology as a synonym of digital acquisition of data or digital drawing, and as the digital industry specialized in computer drawing has evolved exponentially in the last decade, we have witnessed in our own experience how this increase of available techniques affected our work, both in our daily practice as architects as well as in our collaboration within archaeology. In any case, our duty in the mission has always been to apply, whenever needed, those techniques to which we are familiar from our non-academic life into the archaeological process. As technology evolves, so does our collaboration within the mission, and that is maybe best revealed by comparing the oldest works done by the first architects that collaborated in the 2007 mission in Syria, and those documents that we are developing at present. This comparison helps to bring some light around the question how the techniques, all of them, not just the new ones, used to render our hypothesis of reconstruction affect our process of thinking these spaces. The documents generated during our first collaboration in 2007 show different handmade sketches done in situ, some of them which were slightly post-edited through Photoshop. They were done to try to understand the nature of a ramp that had been just unearthed that year and that supposedly connected 3 different levels of the Neo-Syrian palace of Tel Masaic. Every single sketch was done to respond to a different question: the initial inclination of the ramp and therefore how it could have been used, its relation to the different surrounding levels, its access, its hypothetical roofing, and if roofed, how it ventilated or how it was illuminated. Further hypotheses emerged around the relation between the height and the width of this space, which of course also determined what could have been transported through this ramp. These different sketches done during the process of imaging the ramp allowed the team later on to place all the pieces of the puzzle together by synthesizing axonometric drawings. Additionally, by the end of the mission, we were asked to imagine how the resulting courtyard could have looked like. That suggestion encouraged the team to draw a perspective located at the height of a human eye, in an attempt to reconstruct the architectonical experience of being in this space. This last document arose a series of new questions that were added to the hypothesis shown before. The team faced the challenge of incorporating new architectural elements to the drawing to make it understandable or at least visually coherent. Furthermore, the later transcription of the same document from hand drawing to digital model and final rendering implied the generation of even more hypotheses, persuaded by the new technical possibilities offered by the rendering program. These included the incorporation of color and the effect of shading elements calculated by the 3D program. Both perspectives offered a view of the courtyard of the palace with no connection to its surroundings, transforming the architecture in a sort of dreamed or ideal dwelling. Even if they were done using very different techniques, the two resulting images were very similar, as if the later one was just a translation of the first handmade sketch into a virtual render. However, on the next season, in 2009, by looking at the virtual model that had been generated to render that perspective, we started to perceive that, in fact, we were dealing with a much bigger platform that would have reached the outer city wall on the west side of the palace. The working model was then rearranged to illustrate that hypothesis. At that moment, the elements that had been added ultimately to the perspectives of the former seasons were quickly set apart, as all the attention was centered on understanding the relation between the ramp, the bigger platform, and the city wall. The goal of these two last perspectives was to present an attractive final image of the season's work of 2007, even if doing them aroused a series of dilemmas and they contained more questions than answers. However, doing the 3D models enabled new ways of thinking this space and to interpret the evidence from a broader point of view. Thanks to the 3D model, we were able to understand that the ramp did not belong to the original palace, but instead it was added later as a part of a defensive system when the palace was under attack. The 3D models were useful because they inspired new approaches. We understood that these documents should always be regarded as a work-in-progress images that will continuously be revised in the following years. When publishing our work on the mission, we tend to show exclusively the final image of the long process of thinking these spaces, hiding or discarding all other sketches or alternative solutions. Nevertheless, when the work is resumed on the successive seasons, returning to these other reconstructions frequently turns out to be more useful than expected. Any new technique incorporated in our work should be tested in a broad number of ways to discover all the forms it can be implemented. We try to adopt an experimental attitude, especially when dealing with new techniques, not worrying excessively in the early stages of our work about the final aspect of the image, as these documents will surely be revised further on. A good example of this experimentation with new techniques has been the recent inclusion of photogrammetry in our collaboration in the mission of Qasr Shemamok in the Iraqi Kurdistan. These techniques allows us to obtain a model which is visually identical to the site, employing very simple logistics, essentially just an average digital camera. The implementation of photogrammetry has introduced a new graphic language to the documents we generate, allowing us to rethink the way we approach reconstructions. In our relatively short experience with this technique, we have been able to verify that the possibilities it offers within archaeology are substantial, both to interpret and to disseminate the evidence found. The program generates a model based on a series of pictures taken from a particular trench. Importing this model into a 3D rendering program permits to get pictures of the site of any point of view, including a floor plan, an aerial perspective, or a section. In these examples, we have focused on combining different techniques. By overlapping handmade and AutoCAD drawings with renders of the photogrammetric model, we can then emphasize those elements that we consider more important or relevant on a particular trench. The model can be also modified, and new elements can be added, emulating an in-situ reconstruction. Additionally, this last season, our goal was to achieve a document that helped to describe the process of excavation, showing all the walls, floors, and other architectural structures that were removed during the excavation in order to reach the lower levels. The objective this time was not to reconstruct the whole volume of the building, but instead to show all the evidence found reconstructing those missing parts that were not visible anymore at the end of the season. Moreover, once this model was accomplished, we proceeded to cut it through its middle axis, generating a section that would complement the axonometric view. The feedback of the directors was more positive on this last document, as it facilitated a better understanding of the relation between the different elements, and it was easier to visualize the intersection between the lower and the upper walls. The photogrammetric section and axonometric presented point of view that would have been impossible to obtain with other techniques. However, it was not our initial idea to generate a section from the model. The idea came to us eventually during the process. We learned that once the photogrammetric model is completed, generating further sections, perspectives, or plans is very fast, and it can be an efficient way to carry on further work. Thus, the photogrammetric model can easily become a complementary tool to interpret the findings, instead of exclusively thinking of it as a way to present the work in a beautiful, definite way. It is a question of precision more than aesthetics. Those images do not show imprecise sketches anymore, but accurate diagrams instead. We now understand that the technique is an opportunity to adopt new approaches to allow a better reading of the evidence. We believe that the photogrammetric models are especially useful in the mission since they have the capacity to simultaneously show more layers of information. In any case, including too many details on a single image holds the risk to saturate the document with excessive data, which can be counterproductive. At any rate, we see them as complements of the other graphic material generated in the mission. We still do not think of them, however, as isolated material that can substitute traditional techniques. They also work well to catch people's attention, and this makes them especially interesting when dealing with reconstructions for exhibitions. As they incorporate a photographic realism, they adopt a graphic language to which everyone is familiarized. They become more accessible, as the observer immediately understands the context and the scale of the space shown, as much as the amount of evidence found. They are attractive in a similar way that realistic reconstructions with a high amount of detail are attractive. Although here what is shown in a realistic way is the site, not the hypothetical reconstruction. The evidence found works as a scenario for the information whose relevance we want to emphasize. We assume that the more realistic the image, the more accessible it is to the public. This might be right, but it does not imply that this realism has to be applied to reconstructed elements. Instead, it can be focused on the surrounding context obtained, in this case, through photogrammetry. This video shows an example of the implementation of these ideas in a reconstruction of the Agora of Athens for an exhibition on ancient Greece, exhibited in Madrid, in Spain, and that will soon be shown in a traveling exhibition in the States and in Canada. The organizers of the exhibition stated that they wanted to allow the visitors to feel the experience of being inside the Agora. The ambiguity of this statement gave us the freedom to decide what we wanted to show and how we wanted it to be shown. This allowed us to experiment with the photogrammetric models once again, applying a similar criteria to the one used in the archaeological mission. The architect Eric Rusin, a member of the team, was able to document the actual state of the site by generating photogrammetries of the visible remains of some of these buildings, as well as panoramic views and films that were also included in the final animation. When looking at this material, we understood that the details of the realistic context allowed the observer to better understand the experience of being at the site today. We decided that the goal of this video would be to try to show at the same time how the site looks like at present and how it might have looked like in classical times. The reconstruction would be placed over the photogrammetry and would simply be suggested by lines, surfaces, or volumes in an abstract language that would contrast with the actual context. We liked this solution as it helped to avoid hyper-virtual reconstructions resembling to the aesthetics of a video game. Furthermore, by placing both the evidence and the reconstruction together, we were showing what amount of architecture had been reconstructed. The final animation was projected in a space expressly designed for the video installation, at the center of the exhibition. 4 projectors allowed the simultaneous view of a 360 degrees panoramic view of the square. The video had a duration of 10 minutes, in which were also included plans, hand drawings, photographs, and filmings of the actual state of the site. Additionally, visitors were invited to take headphones where they could hear recordings of old text by classical authors related to the Agora. Now, this was our personal way to interpret the statement of the organizers. We understood this experience as an opportunity to experiment with placing together different techniques, both old and new, and thus include more material. However, when we made the projection rehearsals on the gallery, some people felt there was too much information being shown too quickly. The first version of the video had to be re-edited in order to slow down its pace and to reduce the density of data. We felt like we had reached a limit on the amount of information being able to show in the video. It is maybe too risky to think that the more information you include on a reconstruction, the more effective this document will be. There is certainly a limit on the amount of data absorbable by the audience, and this needs to be taken into consideration regardless of the technique employed. Another similar experience was the exhibition Before the Flood, Mesopotamia 3500-2100 BC, held in Barcelona and in Madrid in Spain in 2012 and 2013. In this exhibition, new and old reconstructions of some of the main Sumerian cities were shown together. The techniques used in these reconstructions were not so different from the ones used in the Agora shown before, although here all the documents, such as plans, photographs, and videos of the actual state of the site, were shown separately. Next to them, the original reconstructions from the 30s by Lenzen and De Lugas, drawn in paper with ink and pencil, were placed close to screens showing modern renders of the same spaces. Additionally, the screens also projected animations showing several iconic buildings of Ur, Eridu, Kafaje, and Duruk. Furthermore, a physical model of the city of Ur was demanded by the organizers. When placed next to the animations, the staticism of the model and the dynamism of the animations held a strong contrast. We understood that the finished model was evoking, maybe more than the other documents, a feeling of immanence, a sense of realism which maybe was perceived as unfavorable given that the model was a graphic narrative, a fiction, inspired by Charles Leonard Woolley's descriptions of the New Sumerian city of Ur. Therefore, when the model was finished, an augmented reality application was developed. When pointing the camera of a mobile phone or a tablet towards the model, a video showing the process of reconstruction would be activated. We understood that both the AR application and the video showing the process of reconstruction helped to bring some dynamism to the static nature of the model. The video shown included an animation of the famous patio house at Ur as described by Woolley. An interesting revealing occurred when modeling the house with a 3D program, as some incoherences in the structural definition of the roofing of the house were exposed, which made the original perspective made by Woolley impossible to model. We assumed that the space Woolley reconstructed in his drawing was modified to look better in the perspective. It was interesting to notice that, after all, we were dealing with the same dilemmas that Woolley faced when reconstructing these spaces. The need to draw a comprehensible image of the patio modified its shape. When placing both the old reconstructions rendered by the archaeological missions at the beginning of the 20th century next to modern reconstructions rendered expressly for the new exhibitions, the graphic styles of both documents were confronted. This confrontation aroused the question of how our perception of these spaces was affected by the new techniques applied. Most of the old reconstructions shown in the Before the Flood exhibition showed a pristine, almost heavenly aspect, very aptly suited to what the audience at the beginning of the 20th century, we supposed, demanded them to be. They had to look monumental because we needed them to be monuments. They had to look iconic, as they had to represent a milestone in the history of architecture. They had to seduce, they had to be fascinating, unaltered despite the millennia, even if they looked phony or even condescending. The truth is, most of these reconstructed spaces only existed in paper. They were designed just as a modern monument is designed, and probably for the same purposes. In contrast, the modern render shifted its appearance towards realism, in a very similar way as how architecture is presented nowadays in architecture competitions. So, concluding, the question arising was, are the different techniques applied a reflection of a shift in our comprehension of these spaces? Or did they just show a difference in the demands of the audience? We cannot avoid to ask ourselves, when dealing with developing reconstructions for exhibitions, and regardless of the modernity of the techniques employed, how much does the public's demand for a coherent visual narrative transform or modify the final resulting reconstruction? Regardless if the techniques applied can be described as analytical, virtual, or cyber archaeology, a document that is intended for a general public should take special care in looking for the right graphic criteria that successfully communicates what we want to communicate from a particular space, building, or city. While the applications of a virtual 3D model are quite restricted to what has been defined as virtual archaeology, we understand that photogrammetry and augmented reality should be placed somewhere in between virtual and cyber archaeology, since they incorporate a significant advance in the fields of data acquisition, analysis, simulation, curation, and dissemination. We no longer understand these documents as a beautiful concluding image of the season's work, or at least not exclusively as such. Instead, we prefer to regard them as sketch models more than conclusion models. The work in progress factor should always be taken into account, as most of these documents will surely be revised on the following seasons. It is only after generating several images, after experimenting with all the new graphic possibilities offered by virtual rendering, by photogrammetries, or by augmented reality, that we can select the image that best communicates what we want to communicate, and thus understand the potential of these new techniques. A potential that, to the day of today, we are just beginning to preview. Thank you for your attention.